My parents told us only the most successful child would stay in the family, and the others would be disowned. I was 14 when my parents sat the four of us down in the living room and announced the competition. My father stood by the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back, like he was giving a business presentation. My mother sat in her usual chair with a leather notebook open on her lap. She'd been taking notes on us for years, tracking everything we did, but I'd always thought it was just her being organized. Now I understood it was something else entirely. My father explained that they'd spent years raising 4 children and pouring resources into all of us, but they'd realized this approach was inefficient. Instead of dividing their estate and attention 4 ways, they would focus everything on one child, the most successful one, the one who proved they deserved it. The rest of us would be removed from the will, cut off financially, and expected to leave the family permanently once we turned 18. My younger brother Isaiah was 12 and didn't fully understand what Dad was saying. He asked if this was like a game show and when we'd find out who won. My older sister Camilla was 16 and her face went completely white. She'd been planning to attend an expensive private college and our parents had promised to pay for it. My twin brother Kieran sat perfectly still next to me on the couch, his hands gripped tight on his knees. I could feel the tension radiating off him even though we weren't touching. Dad continued explaining the rules like he was laying out a business strategy. We would be evaluated on academic performance, extracurricular achievements, leadership qualities, and what he called life readiness skills. Every month, Mom would update her rankings based on our progress. We'd each receive a score out of 100, and those scores would determine everything from our allowances to whether we got to participate in family activities. The child in first place would get privileges and investment, the others would get the bare minimum required by law until we could be legally separated from the family. Mom opened her notebook and showed us the first month's rankings. Camilla was in first place with an 87, I was second with a 79, Kieran was third with a 71, Isaiah was last with a 63. She'd calculated these scores using a complex formula she'd developed over the past year without telling us. Academic grades counted for 40%. Extracurricular involvement counted for 25%. Household contributions counted for 20%, and something she called character assessment counted for 15%. That last category was completely subjective and based on her observations of our behavior. I asked what happened if we refused to participate, and my father's expression went cold in a way I'd never seen before. He said we were already participating whether we liked it or not. We lived in his house and relied on his money and followed his rules. That night after our parents went to bed, the 4 of us gathered in Camilla's room to talk. She was furious and scared at the same time, pacing back and forth across her carpet. She'd been the golden child her whole life, and now that position felt threatened. Isaiah was crying quietly because he didn't understand why our parents would do this. Kieran sat on the floor with his back against the wall, staring at nothing. I tried to suggest we could all just maintain our normal routines and refuse to compete, but Camilla immediately shut that down. She said if the rest of us didn't compete, she'd dominate the rankings by default, and then we'd all get disowned except her. Kieran pointed out that refusing to compete might actually be worse than competing because Mom's subjective character assessment could punish us for not trying. We were trapped in a system designed to pit us against each other, and there was no way to opt out without losing everything. The competition started affecting everything within the first week. Mom posted the monthly rankings on the refrigerator where we'd see them every day. Camilla's name was at the top in green marker. Mine was second in blue. Kieran's was third in yellow. Isaiah's was at the bottom in red. Seeing our names arranged in that hierarchy made something shift in how we interacted with each other. Camilla stopped helping Isaiah with his homework because boosting his scores might hurt her ranking. Kieran started staying up until 2 a.m. working on extra credit projects to close the gap between us. I found myself checking what my siblings were doing constantly, comparing my efforts to theirs, calculating whether I was falling behind. The monthly allowances reflected our rankings too. Camilla got $200. I got $100. Kieran got $50. Isaiah got $20. When Isaiah asked why his allowance had dropped from the $50 he used to get, Dad explained that limited resources needed to go to the children showing the most promise. School became a nightmare of constant comparison. Camilla and I were both juniors at the same high school, and every test score and assignment grade felt like ammunition in the competition. When she got a 98 on a history exam and I got a 94, I saw her smiling as she calculated how that would affect the monthly rankings. When I won a spot on the debate team and she didn't make callbacks, she spent the whole car ride home in furious silence. Our parents had always encouraged academic achievement, but now it felt weaponized. Every success I had was a threat to Camilla's position, and every success she had pushed me further from safety. Kieran was in a different grade, so we didn't directly compete in classes, but I could see the pressure destroying him. He'd always been more creative than academic, better at art and music than at math and science. Now he was forcing himself to fit a mold that didn't match who he actually was. The character assessment category became a tool for psychological warfare. Mom would dock points for things like having a messy room, speaking disrespectfully, or showing poor attitude. These were completely subjective judgments that she could use to manipulate the rankings however she wanted. When Kieran argued with Dad about the fairness of the competition, he lost 5 character points. When I forgot to take out the trash one night, I lost 3 points. Camilla learned quickly that the way to maintain her position was to be perfectly compliant and agreeable at all times, never questioning our parents' decisions. She transformed into this artificial version of herself, always smiling, always helpful, always performing the role of ideal daughter. Isaiah struggled the most with the character assessment because he was 12 and still acted like a kid. He got points deducted for leaving toys out, for talking too loud, for watching too much TV. Things that were normal for his age became failures in Mom's scoring system. 3 months into the competition, Camilla's boyfriend broke up with her because she'd become obsessed with maintaining her ranking. She'd stopped seeing him on weekends because she needed that time for extra studying and volunteer work. She'd canceled dates to attend networking events that might boost her leadership score. When he told her she'd changed and wasn't the person he'd started dating, she didn't even seem upset. She just calculated that being single would give her more time to focus on winning. I watched my sister transform into someone I barely recognized, someone who'd sacrificed her actual life and relationships for the sake of a competition our parents had invented. When I tried to talk to her about it, she told me I was trying to sabotage her because I was jealous of her first-place position. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was jealous. Or maybe I was just scared of what this competition was doing to all of us. Kieran started having panic attacks in the middle of the night. I'd wake up to the sound of him hyperventilating in the bathroom, and I'd sit outside the door talking him through breathing exercises until he could calm down. He was terrified of ending up in last place, of being the one who got completely cut off. Our parents had made it clear that the child ranked last would receive nothing. No college fund, no family connection, no support of any kind after 18. Kieran had 2 more years until he aged out, and the thought of being homeless and alone at 18 was eating him alive. I tried to reassure him that I wouldn't let that happen, that we'd stick together no matter what the rankings said, but we both knew I had no power to protect him if our parents decided to cut him off completely. I was just another kid trapped in the same system. The household contributions category turned our home into a competitive nightmare of chores and tasks. Camilla started waking up at 5 a.m. to clean the kitchen before anyone else could. I began doing yard work and repairs that nobody had asked for, just to log extra points. Kieran took over all of Isaiah's assigned chores and did them himself because Isaiah was too young to do them to Mom's standards. We were competing to see who could sacrifice more of their time and energy to housework, turning basic family responsibilities into a ranked performance. Mom kept a detailed log of everything we did, timing how long tasks took and rating the quality of our work. She'd inspect the bathroom after someone cleaned it and dock points if she found a single hair in the sink or a spot on the mirror. The house had never been cleaner, but it had also never felt more hostile. 6 months in, Isaiah started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 7. The stress of being in last place and seeing the disappointed looks on our parents' faces every day was breaking him down. He was 12 years old and convinced he was a failure because he couldn't compete with teenagers who were 4 and 6 years older. I found him crying in the garage one afternoon, and he told me he wished he'd never been born because then our parents wouldn't be disappointed in him. That moment broke something in me. I went to my parents' bedroom and demanded they end the competition. I told them what they were doing to Isaiah, how he was falling apart under the pressure. My father listened without expression, and then said Isaiah needed to learn that life involves competition and disappointment. If he couldn't handle pressure now, he'd never survive in the real world. The extracurricular category created another dimension of competition. Camilla joined every club and organization she could fit into her schedule, spreading herself thin just to accumulate activities on her resume. I focused on fewer activities, but tried to achieve leadership positions in them, becoming president of debate team and captain of the academic quiz bowl. Kieran struggled because most of his interests were in areas our parents didn't value. They gave minimal points for his art portfolio, but maximum points for science Olympiad. So he abandoned his actual passions to chase points in activities he hated. Isaiah tried joining sports teams, but kept getting cut because he was small for his age and not particularly athletic. Every rejection felt like another confirmation that he was the family failure. Mom's ranking system didn't account for effort or improvement, only for measurable achievements. Either you won awards and leadership positions, or you got minimal points. A year into the competition, Camilla got into an extremely prestigious summer program at Yale. It would boost her ranking significantly and look incredible on college applications. The program cost $8,000 for 6 weeks, and our parents had the money to send her easily. But Dad sat us all down at dinner and announced that if Camilla went to Yale, there wouldn't be enough money for the rest of us to participate in any summer activities. He could either send one child to an elite program or send all 4 children to normal camps and programs. He asked us to vote on what he should do. Camilla immediately voted for Yale, arguing that investing in the most successful child made sense. Isaiah voted for fair distribution because he'd been looking forward to soccer camp. Kieran and I were stuck in the middle, knowing that either choice would hurt someone. I voted for fair distribution because I couldn't stomach the idea of Isaiah losing his one activity. Kieran voted the same way. Dad looked disappointed in all of us, except Camilla. That summer, none of us got to do our preferred activities because Dad said we'd squandered the opportunity by not making a decisive choice. Camilla didn't go to Yale. Isaiah didn't go to soccer camp. Kieran didn't attend the art intensive he'd been excited about. I didn't participate in the debate institute I'd planned on. Instead, we all stayed home where Mom assigned us additional household projects, and our parents lectured us about the cost of indecision. I realized then that the competition wasn't just about picking one successful child. It was about teaching us to sacrifice each other, to choose individual advancement over family loyalty, to internalize the idea that someone had to lose for anyone to win. We'd failed that lesson by trying to stay united, and our parents were punishing us for it. Kieran's mental health continued deteriorating through that summer. He stopped eating regularly and lost weight until his clothes hung loose on his frame. He stopped making art entirely, abandoning the one thing that used to bring him joy. He spent most of his time in his room studying subjects he hated, trying desperately to improve his ranking. When I asked how he was doing, he'd say fine in a flat voice that meant he was absolutely not fine. I tried to get our parents to notice that something was seriously wrong, but they dismissed my concerns as competitive manipulation. Mom said Kieran was just experiencing the natural stress of falling short of expectations, and he needed to work harder instead of looking for sympathy. Dad told me to focus on my own ranking instead of worrying about my brother. They couldn't see, or didn't care, that the competition they'd created was destroying one of their children from the inside out. The monthly rankings became increasingly arbitrary as Mom adjusted her scoring formulas to maintain the hierarchy she wanted. When my grades started pulling ahead of Camilla's, Mom suddenly increased the weight of the character assessment category, where she could dock me points for subjective reasons. When Kieran briefly overtook me in extracurricular points, the formula changed to emphasize leadership positions over participation. It became obvious that Mom had already decided Camilla would win, and the ranking system was just theater to make it look like a fair competition. But we couldn't prove the system was rigged without access to her detailed formulas and calculations, which she kept locked in her office. We were forced to keep performing in a competition where the winner had already been chosen. Isaiah's 12th grade year started, and he began acting out in ways that were completely unlike him. He got in fights at school, he talked back to teachers, he stopped doing homework. His grades plummeted from B's and C's to D's and F's. When our parents confronted him about it, he said he didn't see the point in trying when he knew he'd never catch up to the rest of us. He'd calculated that even if he got perfect scores in every category, the age disadvantage and the points he'd already lost meant he'd never get out of last place. So why bother trying? Mom and Dad were furious, but I understood what Isaiah was doing. He was opting out of the competition in the only way available to him, by refusing to care about the metrics our parents used to judge him. It was self-destructive, but it was also the only form of control he had left. Midway through my junior year, a guidance counselor named Mr. Whitfield called me into his office because he'd noticed concerning patterns in my file. My grades were excellent, but I'd dropped out of several activities I used to love and added others that clearly didn't interest me. He asked if everything was okay at home, and for the first time, I considered telling an adult what was happening. But what would I even say? My parents aren't breaking any laws. They're feeding us and housing us and not physically hurting us. They're just running a competition to see which child deserves to stay in the family. How do you explain that to someone who doesn't live in it? I told Mr. Whitfield everything was fine, and I was just trying to optimize my college applications. He looked at me with this sad expression, like he knew I was lying, but couldn't force me to tell the truth. That night, I went to Kieran's room and found him with a bottle of our mom's sleeping pills. He'd taken 5 of them and was holding the bottle trying to decide whether to take more. I grabbed the pills and shook him hard, asking what the hell he was doing. He said he couldn't do this anymore, couldn't wake up every day knowing he was failing, couldn't spend 2 more years trying to win a competition designed to destroy 3 out of 4 of us. I told him he wasn't failing, that our parents were the ones failing us. I stayed in his room all night making sure he didn't try anything else, and in the morning, I marched downstairs and told our parents exactly what had happened. My father's response was to say that Kieran was being manipulative and using suicide threats to gain sympathy points. My mother docked Kieran 10 character points for emotional instability. They didn't take him to a doctor or a therapist. They didn't stop the competition. They just punished him for breaking down under the pressure they'd created. I started documenting everything after that. I kept a journal hidden in my closet where I wrote down the rankings each month, the arbitrary formula changes, the impossible standards, and the psychological damage I was watching happen to my siblings. I didn't have a plan for what to do with this documentation, but I needed to create some kind of record proving what was happening to us. I needed evidence that we weren't crazy, that the situation was actually as insane as it felt. Camilla found my journal one day while looking for something in my room. She read through it and then confronted me, accusing me of planning to sabotage the family. She said if I showed that journal to anyone outside the house, she'd tell our parents, and they'd punish me. I asked her how she could defend what they were doing, and she said she was defending her future. She'd worked too hard to let me ruin her chances at winning. The competition entered its 2nd year, and the long-term psychological damage became impossible to ignore. Camilla had developed an eating disorder, restricting her food intake because she'd convinced herself that maintaining a specific weight gave her more control over her life. Isaiah had been suspended from school twice for fighting and was seeing the school counselor weekly for anger issues. Kieran had stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night and had stress-induced eczema covering his arms. I found myself unable to enjoy anything anymore, constantly calculating whether an activity would help or hurt my ranking. We were all performing versions of ourselves that our parents had engineered, and somewhere along the way, we'd lost track of who we actually were underneath the performance. The summer before my senior year, our parents announced that rankings would continue through college. They'd pay for one child's education completely, cover half the costs for the 2nd-place child, provide minimal support for the 3rd-place child, and nothing for the 4th. This meant the competition would extend another 4 years, keeping us locked in this system through our early 20s. Camilla was thrilled because 1st-place position came with full financial freedom. The rest of us realized we'd never escape our parents' control as long as they held the financial leverage. I started researching scholarships and financial aid, planning for the possibility that I'd have to fund college entirely on my own. Kieran did the same. Isaiah was only 13 and couldn't think that far ahead yet, but I could see the defeat in his eyes when he realized this nightmare was going to define his entire adolescence. My senior year started with Camilla at 91 points, me at 84, Kieran at 79, and Isaiah at 61. The gap between first and last place had widened to 30 points, an almost impossible amount to overcome in the remaining months before Camilla turned 18. She'd essentially won by maintaining consistent performance and benefiting from Mom's favoritism. But our parents kept the competition running anyway. They said it was important for all of us to keep striving, keep competing, keep proving our value. I applied to colleges that offered full-ride scholarships because I knew I couldn't rely on my parents for anything. Kieran did the same, targeting schools that had strong financial aid programs. We were planning our escape routes while still performing in the competition because we had no other choice. In December of my senior year, something shifted. Isaiah stopped going to school entirely. He'd wake up, get dressed, leave the house with his backpack, and then spend the day at the public library or wandering around the city. He'd come home at normal school end time so our parents wouldn't notice. He did this for 3 weeks before the school called our parents about his absences. The confrontation that followed was brutal. Dad screamed at Isaiah about throwing away his future and wasting opportunities. Mom updated his ranking to 52 points, the lowest any of us had ever scored. Isaiah just stood there and took it without defending himself, his face completely blank. After our parents left, I asked him why he'd stopped going to school. He said it didn't matter anymore. Nothing he did would matter, so why not just stop trying? I told him it mattered to me, but he just walked away. That was my breaking point. I gathered my documentation journal, my evidence of the ranking changes and the psychological damage, and I made an appointment with a family therapist my school counselor recommended. Her name was Dr. Simmons, and I spent 2 hours in her office explaining everything. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in a way that reminded me terrifyingly of my mother. When I finished, she asked if I felt safe at home physically, and I said yes. We weren't being hit or starved or anything like that. She asked if I felt safe emotionally, and I had no answer for that. How do you measure emotional safety when you're constantly being evaluated and ranked and told that 3 out of 4 of you don't deserve to be part of the family? Dr. Simmons said, what my parents were doing was a form of psychological abuse called conditional love and favoritism abuse. She said it could cause lasting trauma. She asked if I wanted her to report it to Child Protective Services. I sat in her office trying to decide whether reporting would help or make everything worse. CPS investigations are messy and invasive, and they don't always result in changes. We might end up in foster care separated from each other, which could actually be worse than staying together under our parents' control. But if I didn't report it, nothing would change, and Isaiah would keep falling apart, and Kieran would keep taking my mom's sleeping pills, and Camilla would keep starving herself, and I would keep planning my escape while my siblings suffered. Dr. Simmons said she was a mandatory reporter, which meant if she believed we were in danger, she had to report it regardless of what I wanted. She asked me directly if I thought my siblings were in danger, and I thought about Kieran with that pill bottle and Isaiah's blank face and Camilla's hollow cheeks. I said yes. The CPS investigation started the following week. A caseworker named Patricia Okonkwo came to our house unannounced and asked to speak with each of us separately. Our parents were livid, demanding to know who had reported them and what lies had been told. Patricia was calm and professional, explaining that she was there to ensure our safety and well-being. She interviewed all 4 of us in different rooms, asking questions about our daily lives and our relationships with our parents. I told her everything, showed her my documentation journal, explained the ranking system in detail. Camilla defended our parents completely, insisting that they were just encouraging us to reach our potential. Kieran and Isaiah confirmed my story with varying levels of detail. Patricia spent 3 hours in our house, taking photos of the ranking charts on the refrigerator and requesting copies of Mom's scoring logs. My parents were sophisticated enough to make the ranking system look like aggressive but legal parenting. They emphasized that all 4 of us were fed, housed, educated, and not physically harmed. They framed the competition as a motivational structure designed to teach us about real-world pressure. They presented Mom's logs as evidence of involved parenting, not psychological manipulation. Patricia interviewed our teachers, our pediatrician, and our extended family members. Most of them confirmed that we seemed like high-achieving kids from a strict but successful family. The external presentation was so different from the internal reality that it was almost impossible to prove abuse was happening. Patricia told me privately that she believed my report, but she didn't have grounds to remove us from the home. The situation was harmful, but not illegal. She recommended family therapy and would check in monthly, but she couldn't force our parents to stop the competition. After the CPS investigation closed without action, my parents' fury focused entirely on me. They knew I'd reported them, even though I hadn't admitted it directly. Mom dropped my ranking to 71 points, below Kieran for the first time, citing catastrophic failures in character assessment. Dad told me I'd betrayed the family and proven I didn't deserve their support. Camilla stopped speaking to me entirely, treating me like I'd personally attacked her by calling CPS. Only Kieran and Isaiah understood why I'd done it, and they were too scared to defend me openly. I'd sacrificed my position in the competition and probably my relationship with my parents to try to protect my siblings, and it had accomplished nothing. The rankings continued. The psychological warfare continued. We were all still trapped. The college acceptance letters started arriving in March. I got into 3 schools that offered full scholarships, which meant I could leave without depending on my parents for anything. Camilla got into 7 prestigious schools, and my parents threw her a celebration party, announcing that they'd pay her full tuition and expenses anywhere she chose. Kieran got into a state school with partial financial aid, and my parents said they'd cover 20% of his costs, leaving him to figure out the rest. Isaiah was only 13, but watching the vastly different celebrations for each of our acceptances taught him exactly what his future would look like. In last place, barely acknowledged, left to fend for himself. I had one more conversation with Camilla before I left for college. I asked her if winning was worth losing her siblings, worth watching Isaiah fall apart and Kieran nearly kill himself. She said I was being dramatic, that everyone was fine, and we'd all thank our parents eventually for pushing us to succeed. I asked if she really believed that, or if she was just justifying her decision to cooperate with their abuse. She told me I was jealous and bitter about not winning, and I should focus on my own life instead of trying to drag her down. We haven't spoken since that conversation. When I moved into my dorm in August, she didn't help me pack or say goodbye. Neither did my parents. Only Kieran and Isaiah came to see me off, and we all cried in the driveway because we knew I was escaping, but they were staying behind in the nightmare. College gave me physical distance from the competition, but I couldn't stop worrying about my brothers. Kieran texted me regularly with updates about the rankings and Isaiah's continued deterioration. Isaiah had been diagnosed with depression and put on medication, but our parents viewed this as another failure on his part. They docked his character points for needing psychiatric help. Kieran was counting down the days until he turned 18 and could legally leave. I sent money when I could from my work-study job, knowing he'd need help covering college costs that our parents refused to pay. Patricia from CPS continued doing monthly check-ins, but nothing ever changed because nothing technically illegal was happening. Just 4 kids being destroyed by a competition designed to teach them their worth was conditional. The summer after my freshman year, I didn't go home. I stayed at school working and took summer classes. My parents sent me one email saying they were disappointed in my choice but not surprised, given my character deficiencies. Camilla posted pictures on social media of the family vacation they took without me, the 4 of them smiling on a beach somewhere expensive. Isaiah looked thin and unhappy in the photos. Kieran looked like a ghost, but Camilla looked triumphant, the clear winner posing with our parents like she'd earned her place through superiority rather than survival. I felt this complicated mix of grief and anger and relief that I wasn't there, that I'd gotten out, even if it meant being erased from family memories. Kieran turned 18 in October of my sophomore year. He called me from a bus station at 3 a.m. saying he'd left, just packed a bag and walked out while everyone was sleeping. He was heading to his college town early and would figure out housing and work until school started. Our parents didn't try to stop him or even call him. They just updated the rankings to show 3 children instead of 4, redistributing the percentages, so Isaiah dropped even lower. Camilla was still first at 94 points. I was second at 73 points, even though I hadn't lived at home for over a year. Isaiah was last at 57 points. The competition continued despite half the competitors having already left. Isaiah started calling me every night during my sophomore year. He'd talk about his day, or his homework, or nothing in particular, and I realized he just needed to hear someone's voice who cared about him as a person, rather than as a ranking. He was 14, and living alone with our parents and Camilla, who were all united in their belief that he was the family failure. He told me about how they'd stopped including him in family dinners sometimes, saying he could eat in his room since he wasn't contributing meaningfully to household conversations. He described how Camilla had her own car now, while he still took the bus everywhere. He mentioned that his birthday had passed with just a card from our parents, no celebration or gifts. He was being slowly erased from the family while still living in their house, and there was nothing I could do to protect him from 300 miles away. The breaking point came during Isaiah's freshman year of high school. He called me at midnight sobbing so hard I could barely understand him. When he finally calmed down enough to talk, he said he'd found Mom's master plan document on her computer. A detailed timeline showing that once Camilla turned 22 and graduated college, our parents would officially disown the rest of us. They'd already drafted legal documents removing Kieran, Isaiah, and me from their will. They'd written letters to extended family explaining why they were cutting off 3 of their 4 children. They'd calculated exactly how much money they'd save by investing everything in Camilla alone. They'd been planning this systematically for 3 years, and the competition had just been a way to make us complicit in our own disposal. Isaiah read me parts of the document over the phone, and I felt physically sick hearing our parents describe us as bad investments and failed experiments. I drove home the next morning, missing classes I couldn't afford to miss. I gathered Kieran from his college town on the way. We arrived at the house and demanded a family meeting. Our parents sat calmly while I confronted them with what Isaiah had found. I asked how they could do this to their own children, how they could systematically destroy 3 kids while elevating 1. My father responded that they'd given us every opportunity to prove ourselves worthy, and we'd failed. He said it was irresponsible to continue investing in children who hadn't demonstrated sufficient return on that investment. My mother added that Camilla had earned her place through dedication and excellence, while the rest of us had proven we didn't value family enough to fight for it. Camilla sat there silently, her face unreadable, not defending us, but but not defending them either. I told my parents that what they'd done was abuse, that they'd damaged 4 children with their competition and their conditional love. I said I had 3 years of documentation proving the psychological harm they'd caused, and I was prepared to take it to lawyers and therapists and journalists if they didn't stop. My father laughed and said I had no legal standing, no proof of anything illegal, and no resources to fight them. He was right about all of that, but I also had something he didn't expect. I'd been recording the conversation on my phone from the moment we sat down, and in that recording, they'd admitted to planning to disown 3 of their children based on a ranking system they'd manipulated for years. It might not be illegal, but it was damning evidence of their true intentions. I played back the recording and watched my parents' faces change. I told them I wanted the competition ended immediately. I wanted Isaiah's living situation to improve, and I wanted them to agree to family therapy with an independent counselor, or the recording would be sent to every person who knew our family, our church community, our extended family, their colleagues at work. I'd make sure everyone understood exactly what they'd done. It was blackmail, and I wasn't proud of it, but I was out of options for protecting my youngest brother. My parents were silent for a long moment before my father agreed to my terms. The ranking charts came down that day. The monthly evaluations stopped. Isaiah was given privacy and respect that he'd been denied for years. We started family therapy the following week, though my parents spent most of the sessions trying to convince the therapist that they'd been misunderstood. The damage was already done, though. Camilla graduated college with full parental support and immediately cut contact with me, Kieran, and Isaiah. She'd internalized the lesson that we were failures who'd drag her down, and she chose our parents' approval over sibling relationships. I'd lost my oldest sister to the competition, even though I'd technically won the fight to end it. Kieran took 6 years to finish college because he was working full-time to pay for it without parental help. Isaiah was 16 now, and living in a house where the competition had officially ended, but the hierarchy and favoritism remained. He was counting the days until he could leave for college and never come back. I graduated with debt from the years I'd had to cover my own expenses, working 2 jobs and taking extra semesters because I couldn't afford full-time tuition. The 4 of us had survived, but we were all scarred by what our parents had done. 3 years after the competition officially ended, I got a call from Patricia Okonkwo, the CPS caseworker who'd tried to help us. She was writing a report about long-term psychological abuse in high-achieving families, and she wanted permission to include our case anonymously. I agreed, and spent 2 hours on the phone with her describing the competition and its effects. She told me she'd seen dozens of cases similar to ours, families where parents created elaborate systems to pit children against each other under the guise of motivation. She said most of these situations never got reported because the abuse was subtle and sophisticated, hiding behind concepts like healthy competition and high standards. She was trying to develop better frameworks for identifying and intervening in these cases. I gave her my documentation journal and the recording, and my consent to use whatever she needed. If our suffering could help other families avoid the same nightmare, then maybe it meant something. Isaiah left for college last year on a full scholarship to a school 2,000 miles away. He called me from his dorm room crying with relief that he'd finally escaped. He's working with a trauma therapist and slowly building an identity separate from the rankings and the competition. Kieran is working in tech now and has cut off all contact with our parents. I talk to him every week, and we're rebuilding a sibling relationship outside of the competition framework. We're learning to care about each other without calculating comparative worth. It's strange and difficult and healing. Camilla sends occasional emails trying to justify why she chose our parents over us, but I don't respond anymore. She made her choice, and I've made my peace with losing that relationship. I'm 24 now, and still in therapy processing what that competition did to my sense of self-worth. Dr. Simmons, the therapist I first talked to, helped me understand that I've always been enough, that my value isn't determined by rankings or parental approval or achievements that get measured and compared. That understanding comes and goes. Some days I believe it. Some days I still catch myself calculating whether I'm doing enough, achieving enough, proving enough. The competition might have ended, but its effects are permanent. My parents created a system that taught us we were only worth loving if we outperformed each other, and that lesson is carved deep into how we see ourselves and the world. My parents still don't believe they did anything wrong. In their minds, they pushed us to excel, and we're all better for it now. They don't acknowledge the eating disorder or the suicide attempt or the depression or the severed family relationships. They don't take responsibility for creating a competition where 3 children had to lose for 1 to win. They still treat Camilla as the golden child and the rest of us as disappointments who didn't try hard enough. I've accepted I'll never get an apology or acknowledgement from them. The best I can do is break the cycle, build a life based on different values, and make sure I never put other people through what they put us through. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.